black man decided to give up his first-class seat for a pregnant woman, and what happened next was unexpected. He was usually a quiet guy. Some thought it was just shyness, while others figured it was the result of years of facing unfair judgments. When he boarded the plane that morning, he never thought that one small act of kindness would change his life forever. He tried to brush off the curious stares he sometimes got in fancy places. First-class cabins weren't exactly filled with people who looked like him, but he had earned his ticket just like everyone else. A polite smile crossed his face as he settled into his seat. He wasn't there for the gourmet meals or the champagne. He just needed to travel for work, an opportunity he had worked hard to get. He tucked his leather backpack under the seat, pulled out a well-worn novel he had been reading, and flipped to his last page. As he sank into the plush seat, he felt a wave of relaxation wash over him. When the flight attendant came by offering drinks, he asked for orange juice, feeling a bit thirsty. He almost dozed off, lulled by the sound of the engines, but then he noticed the people around him. His thoughts drifted back to the journey that brought him here. He remembered his mother's unwavering support, how she believed in him when no one else did. As a teenager, he had been labeled as trouble, often clashing with teachers who jumped to conclusions. But his mother wouldn't let him fall into that stereotype. She pushed him to work harder and exceed everyone's expectations. Now, as a data analyst at a growing tech firm, he was on his way to secure an important contract that could lead to even greater opportunities, though old doubts still lingered in the back of his mind. He was lost in thought, hearing the echoes of those who never believed in him, almost drifting off when he caught a soft murmur and some frantic whispers. Looking around, he spotted a woman in the aisle, looking a bit wobbly. One hand was gripping the overhead bin for support, while the other rested on her noticeably pregnant belly. She was scanning the first-class seats, seemingly searching for something or someone. Next to her stood a man, looking anxious and just as worried. The flight was packed, and no one in the comfy seats seemed willing to move. The woman looked worn out, and the man's furrowed brow showed his concern. After a moment, they both sighed and glanced toward the back where their assigned seats were. He noticed the woman's shoulders droop, and whether it was from physical fatigue or emotional stress, he felt a twinge of empathy. He imagined how cramped and stressful the flight would be for a mom-to-be. His eyes drifted to the empty seat next to him. He had splurged on first class, but the truth was she needed more. Without hesitating, he stood up and tapped her shoulder. She turned, surprised to see him with a gentle smile. "Ma'am, please take my seat," he said softly. "You'll be more comfortable here." Her eyes widened in shock, and the man beside her looked confused. For a moment, they seemed unsure how to respond, but then relief washed over her face. She tried to decline, saying she couldn't possibly, but he was resolute. He nodded, grabbed his backpack, and motioned for her to sit. The flight attendant, who had been watching, gave him an approving nod as she helped the woman settle into the seat. A guy who said he was the woman's husband gave a sincere thank you to the passenger who had been watching from across the aisle. The passenger, caught off guard by the kindness, cleared his throat and turned to grab his bag, making his way through the narrow aisle. He could feel the curious stares and hear whispers as he walked. Eventually, he found the only open seat at the back, wedged between two big folks who didn't seem so happy about it. He didn't complain, though. At least he got the window seat. Taking a deep breath, he reminded himself it was just a few hours. As the engine roared to life and the plane sped down the runway, he felt himself pushed back into his seat during takeoff. He stole a quick look at the bright morning sky before shutting his eyes, feeling the weight of the people beside him. He didn't expect anything more from the pregnant woman or her husband. A simple thank you was more than enough. But life has a funny way of connecting people. By the time they landed, his small act of kindness would lead to unexpected outcomes. Tired from the flight, he got off the plane later than everyone else and headed to the airport for a coffee to perk him up before his meeting in a few hours. While searching for his wallet, he looked up to see the pregnant woman's husband standing in front of him. "Hey," the guy said with a nervous smile. "I just wanted to thank you again. My wife's name is Grace, and I'm Tom." You really helped her out. She had some complications last month, and sitting in coach would have been tough. Darius nodded, trying to downplay it. It's all good. I'm just glad she was comfortable. Tom then asked for his name, and after Darius introduced himself, they shook hands. Tom insisted on buying Darius a coffee, and even though he felt a bit awkward about it, Tom wouldn't take no for an answer. After they placed their orders, Tom shared that they were in town because Grace's father had recently passed away, and she wanted to spend some time with her family before the baby arrived. Darius offered his condolences, unsure if he should dig deeper into the situation. However, Tom's genuine demeanor was refreshing. He seemed truly grateful and eager to return the kindness. Before they parted ways, Tom insisted they exchange numbers. Darius was skeptical about whether anything would come of it, but Tom was persistent. They said goodbye on a positive note, and Darius rushed off to his meeting. He didn't see Grace and hoped she was either resting or in a more peaceful setting after the stressful journey. He arrived at the downtown office of a well-respected firm that was considering giving Darius's company a significant contract. Darius had gone over all the data and was determined to present a pitch that would showcase his firm's analytical skills. In the conference room, he took a seat at a long glass table across from two serious-looking executives, a middle-aged woman with graying hair in a tight bun and a younger man who was tapping a pen on the table. Their faces were unreadable, and Darius had to shake off any lingering nerves. He had prepared for weeks, practically memorizing data sets and anticipating questions. As he laid out what his company could offer, he noticed small signs of interest in their eyes. But halfway through, the older woman shot him a piercing look and asked, "What makes you think your team can handle this project? We've talked to many firms, and a lot have more experience than you." Her tone was sharp, hinting at the underlying question of why they should trust him. Darius took a breath and replied, "We may be a younger firm, but we have a diverse and talented team that has already delivered results for organizations like yours. We mix innovative ideas with solid data analysis. We're flexible, quick on our feet, and resourceful. You'll get a tailored experience that big companies, stuck in their old ways, just can't offer." He flashed a well-placed smile, sensing she was still a bit skeptical. The younger guy jumped in, recognizing the data Darius had shared. A spark of hope ignited in Darius as he dove into the details of projection models. Moments later, he noticed their cautious expressions start to ease into something more approving. When he wrapped up, both executives stood, shook his hand, and promised to follow up. As he left the building, he felt uncertain but relieved that he hadn't completely messed up. Stepping onto the bustling city street, he turned his phone back on to find 2 missed calls from an unknown number and a text from Tom inviting him to dinner. The offer felt a bit strange, but something about it resonated with him. He had no family nearby, and honestly, loneliness often hit hard during these work trips. He rarely traveled for fun, so a chance for some company and a bit of gratitude sounded nice. He quickly texted back that he was free that evening. Soon after, Tom sent over the address and time. That evening, he headed to a cozy bistro tucked away from the main streets, where a warm light glowed from inside. Tom was outside waving, and Grace stood next to him, her face bright with a welcoming smile. She walked with a certain grace, exuding calmness. They greeted Darius like an old friend and led him inside, where soft jazz played in the background. They picked a round table in the corner, perfect for chatting. The server came by with menus and poured water. Grace was the first to express her gratitude. "I don't think I really thanked you," she said, her eyes shining with sincerity. "That flight was longer than I thought, and with everything happening, I was at my wit's end." He shrugged lightly, replying, "I'm just glad to help." Tom jumped in, sharing how anxious he had felt, and you could see that no one else even flinched. It was one of those moments that makes you realize how rare kindness really is. Tom exchanged a look with Grace, and they both seemed to agree on something unspoken. "We know this might sound a bit odd," Tom said, "but there's something we need to discuss." Darius raised an eyebrow, looking unsure. "Sure," he replied. Tom and Grace glanced at each other again, as if deciding who would go first. Finally, Grace took a deep breath. "We're having a baby soon. My due date is just a few weeks away. We came here to sort out my father's estate, and it's a bit complicated. We could really use some help." She paused, nervously playing with her napkin. "We don't expect you to fix everything, but we feel like you're someone we can trust." Darius was surprised. "Me? You barely know me." Grace nodded. "We get that it's awkward, but you gave up your seat without hesitation. Most people wouldn't do that, and it made us think we'd like to work with someone who values doing the right thing over their own comfort." Tom cleared his throat. "Grace's dad had a business, but we're still figuring out the details. There's some complicated financial stuff, and we were hoping to find someone with data skills to help us make sense of it all. We have a lawyer, but we need a clearer view of what we're dealing with. We can pay you, though probably not what your firm does, but it's a side project. Are you interested?" Darius's mind raced. He had come to the city for a business pitch, and now he was faced with a personal plea for help. He asked a few careful questions about the business and the data involved. Grace explained that her father had run an import-export company, and after his passing, she found multiple accounts, possibly some off-the-books transactions, and a bunch of confusing spreadsheets that didn't seem complete. "I don't think anything illegal is going on," she said, her voice a bit shaky, "but my dad had a tendency to trust the wrong people, and I want to make sure no one is taking advantage of us." Darius thought about how long it might take, but figured he could tackle it during his off hours. He couldn't help but notice how overwhelmed Grace looked as she coped with her father's passing and prepared for motherhood. "Sure," he said, surprising himself. "Send me what you have and I'll see what I can do." Grace visibly relaxed, leaning back in her chair, and Tom flashed a big smile. They ordered dinner, and for a brief moment, the atmosphere lightened. They chatted about everyday stuff, the name they were considering for the baby, how Darius got into data analytics, and Grace's fond memories of her dad. Eventually, the conversation drifted back to a sensitive topic that neither Tom nor Grace brought up directly: the awkward tension they sometimes felt regarding how others reacted to them. Grace and Tom were both white, while Darius was black. The dynamic in the cozy bistro drew a few curious glances, but within their comfortable bubble, those looks felt far away. After dinner, they stepped outside into the crisp night air. Grace asked if Darius needed a ride, but he waved it off, saying he had a hotel close by. They parted ways, feeling a genuine connection, even though none of them could foresee how intertwined their lives would soon become. The next morning, Darius woke up to an email from Grace with a folder attached dozens of scanned documents, ledger sheets, and partial bank statements. He poured himself a cup of black coffee, opened his laptop, and started digging into the maze of numbers. The deeper he went, the more questions popped up. He spotted some recurring transactions that didn't add up, large amounts of money moving through various subaccounts. It dawned on him that this could be more complex than they had all thought. Still, he had to juggle this new side project with his regular work. That afternoon, the potential client from the day before asked for a second meeting, so Darius set aside the tangled finances for a bit and headed back to the office. The younger executive was all smiles this time. "We really appreciate your thoroughness," he said, leading Darius into a smaller conference room. "We'd like to meet the rest of your team and maybe set up a conference call for next week." Darius felt a flicker of hope and left the meeting feeling upbeat. But as he stepped onto the bustling sidewalk, his phone buzzed again with an unknown number. He answered it cautiously, only to hear an unexpected voice. "Darius, it's Tom. Sorry to bother you, but Grace is in the hospital. It's probably nothing serious, but the doctor wants to keep her overnight since she was feeling dizzy. Just wanted to keep you in the loop. She asked me to let you know." A wave of concern washed over him, and he asked if they needed anything. Tom hesitated. "We're okay, I think, just worried. Keep working on the documents if you can, and we'll touch base soon." Darius agreed, adrenaline coursing through him as he hailed a taxi back to his hotel. He opened his laptop again, trying to push aside his worries for Grace. But as he dug deeper into her father's finances, a gnawing dread settled in. Some transactions had strange references to shipping containers, and the amounts seemed off. He found names that looked legitimate alongside others that raised red flags. Was this just poor management, or was something more sinister at play? He forced himself to take a break, trying not to jump to conclusions, but the patterns suggested a possible scam or illegal activity, making him increasingly uneasy with each finding. That night, sleep eluded him as his mind raced. He imagined Grace and Tom dealing with the stress of a hospital, the baby's health overshadowing everything. He also worried about how easily he had become involved in their lives, fearing it might lead to complications. The next morning, Tom called with good news. Grace was released. The doctors advised her to take it easy to avoid stress. Darius felt a renewed sense of duty. How could she relax when her late father's finances were such a mess? He decided to speed up his analysis, diving deep into every detail. He juggled calls with former clients, looking for any clues, and scoured local business forums for mentions of Grace's father's company. Slowly, pieces of a puzzle began to come together. Some shipments looked legit, while others raised red flags. Certain patterns hinted that someone close might be skimming funds. When he met Grace and Tom again, she looked exhausted, pressing a hand to her belly as if to reassure the baby. They were back at the same bistro, but this time Grace opted for tea instead of water, and Tom barely touched his coffee. Darius shared his findings, and their expressions grew more troubled with each word. Grace's voice trembled as she asked, "Why would someone do this? My dad wasn't perfect, but he was honest." Tom, visibly tense, asked if it was possible that someone close to her father was stealing money. Darius confirmed, "It seems that way. I don't have solid proof yet, but there are clear inconsistencies. We should probably take this to your lawyer, and if you trust me, I can keep investigating." Grace took a deep breath, swallowing hard, and said, "Do it. We need to know." They parted ways, leaving Darius with a sense of urgency. The next day, he returned to the firm he was hoping to land a big contract with. He gave a quick presentation during a working lunch, all while his phone buzzed with texts from Tom. The tension was palpable, but he had to stay focused. Landing this contract would be huge for his career. Still, he felt a moral obligation to keep Grace and Tom informed. After the meeting, which seemed promising, he rushed to meet Tom at a local coffee shop. Tom's face was serious as he opened a manila folder and placed it on the table between them. There were letters inside from an unknown address, demanding cash for vague protection services. Tom nervously tapped them, saying they were found in Grace's dad's study. Darius read through the letters, which threatened to reveal past mistakes if the money wasn't paid. The amounts they were asking for lined up with some questionable transactions in the account, sending a chill down Darius's spine. This wasn't just your typical embezzlement. It felt more like blackmail. Tom lowered his voice, saying Grace couldn't handle this right now, and they shouldn't add to her stress. But he was at a loss for what to do next. Darius rubbed his temples, assuring him they'd figure out. "You have a lawyer, right?" he asked. Tom nodded, mentioning the lawyer was good, but mostly dealt with estate issues, and he wasn't sure if he could handle something like this. They decided Darius would quietly investigate further, focusing on the names, addresses, and references in the letters. That night, Darius found himself back in his hotel room, hunched over his laptop, fueled by adrenaline. He chased every lead online, but the addresses didn't yield any solid results. Was Grace's father involved in something shady, or was he just a victim of a scam? Darius's eyes were burning from the screen, his mind racing with possibilities. A week flew by, filled with data analysis, tension, and quick updates from Tom about Grace's health. Darius kept answering calls from a potential client, feeling optimistic they'd sign the contract soon. Despite the growing stress, he felt a new determination building within him. He'd always been the type to keep to himself, but this time, stepping out of that comfort zone felt necessary. One afternoon, while sifting through documents, Darius noticed a pattern. The blackmail letters referenced a shipping route from Asia, and the suspicious transactions matched that route, pointing to a local facility. He found a partial match in the city's business registry, linking a warehouse to a guy named Clyde Harris. Darius had never heard of this guy before, so he started digging through the old files that Grace's dad had kept. He found a note scribbled in the margin of a ledger that said he needed to talk to Clyde about insurance. It was dated just a month before Grace's dad passed away, and his heart started racing. Could Clyde be the blackmailer, or was he just another piece of the puzzle? Darius decided to call Tom right away. Tom listened, and then suggested they check it out since Grace was resting. The doctor had put her on bed rest for a few days, so he could sneak away for a bit. That evening, they drove to the address listed for the warehouse. The building was at the edge of a commercial district, looking worn down and mostly deserted. The huge, corrugated metal walls loomed behind a locked gate. Tom parked the car a little way off, and the city lights cast a spooky glow on the place. They got out and peered through the fence, where a big sign read, "See Harris Imports." The only sound was the faint hum of traffic from the nearby highway. Tom shook the gate, finding it locked. There might have been a guard somewhere, but no one showed up. Darius scanned the area, unsure if they should even be there. They weren't technically trespassing, but they were close. Then they heard a noise from behind the gates, and a man in his mid-50s stepped out, wearing a heavy jacket. He looked at them with suspicion. Tom introduced himself and explained that Grace's dad had done business with Clyde Harris. The man's attitude shifted a bit. "You with the old man's family?" he asked, eyeing them, especially Darius, with caution. "Got any proof?" Tom and Darius exchanged looks. They had no proof to show other than what they had learned from the documents. Tom fumbled for words, mentioning something about wanting to tie up loose ends. The man shrugged and stepped closer, unlocking the gate but not letting them in. "I'm just the foreman," he said. "Clyde isn't here. If you have questions, you'll need to set up a meeting. We came across some troubling stuff in the records. Do you know if there are any big payments being funneled through here that might not be on the up and up?" The foreman frowned and shot a glance at Darius. "I don't discuss our finances with outsiders, but I do know that Old Man Carver, Grace's dad, had some deal with Clyde. Carver would send shipments through our place, and that's about it." He frowned again, shifting his weight. "If you think something shady is happening, get a warrant or talk to a lawyer." Darius tried to gauge the guy's body language. It wasn't outright hostility, but something felt off. The foreman rubbed the back of his neck. "Look, Clyde's out of town for a few days. If you want answers, come back with some official paperwork or talk to him directly." With that, he stepped back and locked the gate. Tom opened his mouth to argue, but Darius gently pulled on his sleeve, signaling him to leave. No point in making a scene. As they walked away, Tom muttered, "Well, that was a waste." Darius shook his head, feeling more determined. "We'll find a better way. Clyde might be involved, or maybe he's just caught up in this too." They drove back in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Darius wondered if they should bring in the police, but there was no solid evidence, just some incomplete ledgers and suspicious letters. Plus, there was Grace, who didn't need any more stress. He also worried about his own job if he got mixed up in an investigation. What would that mean for the contract he was about to secure? Back at his hotel, Darius tried to sleep but couldn't. His mind kept replaying every conversation and clue. Eventually, he dozed off, only to be jolted awake at dawn by another call from Tom. "Darius, something's off," Tom said, panic in his voice. "Our attorney tried to track down some paperwork, but the county office said certain files are sealed. And get this, someone left a note in our mailbox last night. It said, 'Stop digging or else.' Grace is freaking out." Darius felt a knot in his stomach as things started to spiral out of control. "I'm really sorry this is happening," he said, struggling to find the right words. "Do you want me to come over?" Tom sounded relieved. "Would you? Maybe you can help calm Grace." Darius quickly agreed, getting dressed and rushing out. The rideshare dropped him off in a charming neighborhood with tree-lined streets. Tom's house was simple but welcoming, complete with a cozy front porch. Grace met him at the door, looking worn out but resolute. She handed him a note typed in bold letters that read, "Stop asking questions or you'll regret it." Darius's first instinct was to suggest they call the police, but Grace sank into an armchair, looking defeated. "I'm scared," she admitted, "but what can they do with so little evidence?" Tom paced the living room, determined. "We need to keep digging. We have to find out who's behind this, whether it's Clyde or someone else. We can't let them intimidate us." Darius tried to stay calm. "I'll keep looking into it, but we need to be careful. No more random trips to the warehouse. Let's gather some proof first." Grace nodded, placing a protective hand on her belly. The baby was moving a lot, a good sign, but each kick reminded them of how little time they had before the due date. Darius promised to be discreet, balancing the investigation with his work commitments. He spent the next few days wrapping up details for a major contract, feeling a rush of pride when he got the call that his firm had been selected. His boss was thrilled, showering him with congratulations from headquarters. Darius felt validated after all those years of hard work and late nights. But a shadow hung over his joy. Grace's situation was still unresolved. Without hesitation, he decided to stick around a bit longer, telling his boss he had personal matters to handle. His boss, impressed with his success, encouraged him to take as much time as he needed. That evening, Tom invited Darius over for dinner. Grace was doing her best to hide her anxiety, but Darius could see the tension during their simple meal. They went over the documents again, and Darius shared his theory that the blackmailer might have an insider connection, someone who was closely involved with the finances. They tossed around the idea that it could be Clyde, Harris, or one of his staff. Grace brought up her dad's old business partner, Ronald, who had left the company unexpectedly. She hadn't seen him in years. Tom remembered hearing about Ronald too. "Yeah, your dad mentioned they had a falling out, but do you really think Ronald would come back and threaten you now?" Darius shrugged. If he held a grudge or something went wrong in the business, it's possible. They decided to track Ronald down. Later that night, Darius found an online listing for a Ronald Fletcher who matched the age and location. The next morning, he and Tom drove across town to check out. The address led them to an old apartment complex in a rougher part of the city. They knocked on the door, unsure of what to expect. An older man answered, his thinning hair and sharp gaze giving him a weary look. When they mentioned Grace's father, he let out a slow breath. "He's gone," Ronald said, stepping aside to let them in. The apartment was small and cluttered with old furniture. Ronald sank into a worn chair and gestured for them to sit on the couch. He looked exhausted, as if burdened by unspoken regrets. Tom cleared his throat. "We found evidence that someone is blackmailing Grace. Her father's finances are a mess, and we're trying to figure out who's behind it. We thought you might know something." Ronald's expression turned heavy with emotion. "I left the business because I couldn't handle some of the deals your father was making. I wanted to stay honest, but he started trusting Clyde Harris. I warned him Clyde was trouble, but he wouldn't listen." He paused, rubbing his temple. "I never wanted things to end badly between us. We were friends once, but I walked away when I realized what Clyde was planning." Darius leaned in, his heart racing. "What do you know about Clyde's plans?" Ronald's eyes shifted to a dusty window. "He's mixed up in some smuggling operation. Could be precious stones or even illegal stuff. Your father, rest his soul, thought Clyde was just a tough businessman, but once I noticed the signs, I had to step back. I told him to sever ties, but he wouldn't listen. It wasn't just business, they were friends. I suspect Clyde convinced him there was nothing shady happening, just some profitable shortcuts." Tom asked, "Did my father-in-law know about the blackmail?" Ronald shrugged. "No idea. I do remember your father-in-law called me out of the blue a month before he passed. He was frantic, saying he needed to secure everything. I told him it was too late. Now you show up with news of blackmail, and honestly, I'm not surprised. Clyde thrives on intimidation. He probably doesn't want Grace digging into the finances. Maybe it would expose him, or he's just trying to keep his empire safe." Darius felt a wave of anxiety. Could Clyde really be violent? Ronald's words painted a dark picture. They asked if Ronald would help them gather evidence. He hesitated, looking conflicted. "I'm old. This was ages ago. But if it helps Grace, I'll give it a shot. We parted on bad terms, but I don't want her to suffer." They exchanged contact info, and as they left the apartment, a sense of dread washed over them. This was bigger than they thought. If Clyde Harris was running an illegal smuggling ring, the blackmail letter was just the beginning. When Tom and Darius told Grace, she went pale. She stared at her father's framed photo on the mantel. "How could he get involved in something like that?" she whispered. "He was a good man." Darius spoke softly. "He might not have known everything. Clyde could have lied, or your dad just trusted him. Either way, we need to be careful." Grace nodded, tears in her eyes. "This is so overwhelming." They decided to consult Grace's attorney, a level-headed guy named Leonard Pearson. Leonard's face went pale when Clyde Harris was mentioned. He quickly suggested they hire a private investigator to help build a stronger case, potentially involving the authorities when the time was right. Darius stepped up to be the main contact for the investigator, handing over all the information he had gathered and even sharing Ronald's contact details afterward. Grace was incredibly grateful to Darius, who reminded her that he had just pieced together some facts. Still, the appreciation in her eyes was clear. Sometimes, all we need is someone who cares enough to lend a hand, she said softly. Weeks flew by in a tense haze as Grace's due date approached. Tom was on high alert, keeping an eye out for anything suspicious around their home. A couple of times he noticed a car lingering outside for too long and rushed out, only to find it was just a neighbor's friend. The paranoia hung over them like a cloud. Darius juggled calls with the private investigator and updates on his new project. Even with the pressure to deliver results for his firm, he felt a renewed sense of purpose in helping Grace and Tom. Still, the ongoing mystery made his stomach churn, and he worried that Clyde might ramp up his threats at any moment. Eventually, the private investigator uncovered something significant. Clyde Harris had a known associate with a history of intimidation. This associate's name matched part of the signature on the blackmail letters. While it wasn't solid proof, it was a promising lead. Leonard, the attorney, decided it was time to approach the police discreetly. Darius braced himself for skepticism, but the detective they met with was surprisingly receptive. They handed over financial documents, suspicious letters, and the investigator's notes. The detective assured them he would look into it and advised them to stay alert, but avoid making any rash moves. It was a huge relief to have the authorities involved, but they had to trust that everything would work out. Not long after Tom called Darius in a panic, they rushed Grace to the hospital because her water broke early. Darius's heart raced as he hurried to the hospital, where he found Tom pacing back and forth, looking pale and worried. Grace was in a delivery room with nurses all around her. Darius joined Tom in the waiting area, and the tension was almost unbearable. Hours dragged on until finally, a nurse came out with a smile, saying they could see Grace and that the baby was fine. A wave of relief washed over them as they entered the room. Grace was cradling a tiny bundle, tears of joy streaming down her face. The baby opened her eyes for a moment before closing them again. Tom kissed Grace's forehead, whispering how proud he was. Darius hung back near the doorway, unsure if he should join their family moment, but Grace waved him over, thanking him again for giving up his seat on that flight, which allowed her to get the care she needed. The baby, a little girl, symbolized their fresh start. While Tom and Grace cherished this precious moment, Darius couldn't shake the thought of Clyde Harris lurking outside the hospital room. For now, he pushed that worry aside and focused on the joy of new life. In the following days, Grace recovered, and Darius visited her with her favorite tea, providing moral support. They tried to avoid discussing the blackmail or the investigation in front of the baby, but once they were sure Grace and the little one were safe at home, Tom shared that the detective had warned them Clyde Harris was under investigation and search warrants had been issued for the warehouse. They hoped it would be enough to press charges, and Darius felt a flicker of cautious optimism. Then came a phone call that shattered their fragile peace. It was Ronald, his voice trembling. He said someone claiming to represent Clyde had contacted him, threatening him if he kept talking. Darius took a deep breath and told him to stay calm, promising to reach out to the detective immediately. Don't pick up any calls from numbers you don't recognize. If you're feeling uneasy, just call the police. Ronald reached out to the detective, who suggested he file a formal complaint. Darius passed on the info, but the anxiety hit him hard again. This was beyond just idle threats. If Clyde or his crew felt trapped, they could do something extreme. That night, Darius walked around his hotel room, debating whether to leave the city or stick it out until things got better. He chose to stay. He had come this far, and bailing now would feel like letting Grace and Tom down. Another week went by without any new threats, but the tension was still there. The detective reassured them that things were moving forward. Meanwhile, Grace was busy taking care of her newborn. Tom was being extra protective, and Darius checked in every day. Finally, the breakthrough came. The police raided Clyde Harris's warehouse and uncovered evidence of smuggling, fake shipping records, and a bunch of documents tying Clyde to various scams. The next day, Clyde and 2 of his associates were arrested. The blackmail letters matched documents found on their computers, linking them to attempts to pressure Grace's father into allowing illegal shipments. Once her dad figured out what was going on, he threatened to back out, and Clyde resorted to blackmail to keep him in check. After her father's death, he kept using intimidation to stop Grace from uncovering his operation. The relief for Grace and Tom was huge. The detective assured them that any remaining financial issues would be easier to handle now that Clyde's scheme was out in the open. Ronald finally felt like he could breathe again, relieved that the threats might be over. Darius felt a mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. It was done, or almost done. The legal process would take a while, but the immediate danger was gone. Grace and Tom invited Darius over for a low-key celebration dinner, with Grace holding the peacefully sleeping baby in her arms. Darius raised his glass of sparkling cider and proposed a toast to Tom, acknowledging his kindness, perseverance, and unwavering support, even when the fight wasn't his own. Darius felt a blush creep up his cheeks as he replied softly, "I just did what anyone would do." They clinked their glasses together, and the baby stirred, letting out a gentle whimper. Grace began to rock the little one, humming a soothing lullaby. Darius watched them, reminiscing about that day on the plane when his choice to give up a first-class seat had brought them all together. He never expected to become part of their lives, but now he felt a deep, unspoken connection with this family. A few days later, Darius was packing his bags, getting ready to head home. He had accomplished what he set out to do, both professionally and personally. Grace was in good spirits, the baby was thriving, and Tom was keen to sort out this state properly. They had a mountain of paperwork ahead, but the fear of blackmail was behind them. As Darius said his farewells, Grace pulled him into a tight hug. "Thank you truly," she whispered. "You'll always have a place in our home." He smiled, holding the tiny hand of the sleeping baby for a moment. Tom gave him a grateful pat on the back. "Safe travels, my friend. Keep in touch." Darius nodded, promising he would. He hopped into a taxi for the airport, and as he walked through the terminal, memories flooded back. It felt surreal to think that everything began with him giving up his seat for a pregnant woman. When he checked his ticket, he noticed it was first class again, a little gift from his boss for landing a big contract. Still, he found himself scanning the crowd, wondering if someone else might need that seat more than he did. But no one appeared to be in need. He settled into his seat, feeling a sense of ease and quiet pride as the plane ascended into the clouds. He reflected on the unexpected journey, recalling the tension, the fear, Grace's bravery, Tom's loyalty, and Ronald's regrets. Despite the tangled path filled with threats and mysteries, there was a silver lining. Grace's father's name could finally be cleared. The baby had a chance to grow up without that dark cloud hanging over them, and Clyde Harris would finally face the consequences of his actions. For Darius, the biggest takeaway was that even the smallest gestures of kindness could lead to unexpected challenges and sometimes the best rewards. He opened the worn-out novel he had been carrying for weeks, reading the same lines, but with a fresh outlook. He understood that life's chapters don't always go as planned, but that shouldn't stop you from flipping the page. When the flight attendant offered him a glass of orange juice, he smiled, remembering the day he had asked for the same drink before everything changed. He leaned back, determined to enjoy this moment of tranquility, with the steady hum of the plane engines providing a soothing backdrop of closure and new beginnings. Back in his hometown, Darius returned to work, and his boss was thrilled with his performance, praising him for landing a big contract. Word got around that he had gone the extra mile, impressing clients with his hard work. Yet, he felt different somehow. He started to pay more attention to others, noticing little moments where someone might need a hand. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He realized that just being open and kind could make a real difference. He kept in touch with Grace and Tom through texts and occasional calls, receiving pictures of baby, who was growing more curious each day. Grace's voice sounded lighter, free from the weight of her past fears. A few months later, when the trial against Clyde Harris began, Grace testified about what her father had shared, and Ronald provided crucial background on the business. Darius wasn't called to testify, but he was there, ready to support them from the sidelines. The prosecution built a strong case, while Clyde shot angry glares at everyone in the courtroom. But the evidence was overwhelming, and in the end, Clyde was found guilty on multiple counts, ensuring he wouldn't pose a threat again. When Grace called Darius with the news, she was nearly breathless. "It's finally over," she exclaimed, a mix of joy and relief in her voice. "We can really move on now." Darius congratulated her, listening to the baby cooing in the background. "I'm so glad," he replied. "You all deserve some peace." Grace smiled through the phone, saying, "Thanks, Darius. Not just for the plane ticket, but for everything else. You believed in us when things got tough, and I'll always remember that." He felt a wave of humility wash over him. "I just did what felt right." After hanging up, he leaned back in his chair, letting the moment settle in. Sometimes, people come into our lives in unexpected ways. The small gesture he made that day was a game changer for Grace, and for Darius, it revealed a side of him he didn't know existed, the part that could step up for others, even if it meant stepping out of his comfort zone. Life went on. The baby grew, and Grace and Tom managed the estate, building a solid future. Darius thrived in his career, traveling for bigger deals. Each trip, he found himself scanning the crowd, not out of suspicion, but with an open heart. He remembered that pregnant woman in the cramped aisle, exhausted and vulnerable, and how that one act of kindness opened doors to friendships, challenges, and a newfound sense of purpose. Years later, he got a wedding invitation in the mail from Grace's sister, someone he had never met. The invite mentioned a family gathering, and Grace had insisted he be included, calling him part of their extended family now. Darius thought about it. He was busy, but the idea of reconnecting with them made him smile. In the end, he decided to go. On the wedding day, he arrived at a charming old church with stained glass windows. Inside, he spotted Grace holding her toddler's hand, her daughter. The same little girl he had first seen in the hospital was now clutching a tiny bouquet of flowers, her wide eyes scanning the lively crowd. Grace spotted Darius and waved him over, her smile lighting up her face. "You made it," she exclaimed, introducing him to her family members, some of whom already seemed to know who he was. They quietly thanked him for being there for Grace during her toughest times. Darius felt a bit shy under their appreciation, but also a strange sense of pride. Tom gave him a friendly pat on the back, saying, "We owe you so much." But he knew Darius would brush it off as just doing what anyone would do. Darius chuckled softly. "You know me too well." They led him to a seat, and as the wedding ceremony kicked off, he watched the bride walk down the aisle, feeling a rush of emotions. He glanced at Grace and Tom, remembering all they had been through together. Their baby, no longer a baby, was happily playing with a ribbon on Tom's lap, and everyone seemed at ease, free from past worries. Once the vows were exchanged and the ceremony wrapped up, guests moved to a cozy reception hall filled with music, dancing, and laughter. Grace and Tom introduced Darius to more relatives while he sipped punch, enjoying the warm atmosphere. Eventually, Grace pulled him aside for a moment of quiet away from the noise. She clasped her hands, searching for the right words. "I never told you this, but the day you gave me your seat on the plane, I was really scared. I had just received some bad news from my doctor about my blood pressure. Every little comfort mattered. And if you hadn't done that, who knows how the flight would have gone." Darius tried to downplay it, but she continued, "It's not just that you stayed with us even when things got tough. I know you put your own reputation and peace of mind on the line to help us. You showed that there are still good people in the world who do the right thing." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she smiled. "So thank you. Your kindness changed everything for me and my family. My dad's name isn't being dragged through the mud, and my daughter can grow up free from that fear." Darius felt a lump in his throat as he spoke. "I'm really thankful to have been part of this," he managed to say. "You've taught me so much about trust and perseverance." She wrapped her arms around him in a warm hug. Then Tom joined them, taking Grace's hand, and the three of them stood together for a moment, appreciating their special bond. Later, they headed back to the celebration, dancing to the upbeat music and chatting with guests. Darius found a spot at one of the tables, watching the vibrant colors and lights, smiling at the unexpected journey that had led him here. As the night went on, guests started to leave, and the newlyweds were off to begin their new life. Darius said his goodbyes to Grace and Tom, promising to stay in touch more often. The drive back to his hotel was filled with thoughts about how small choices can lead to big changes in life. Once in his room, he sat on the edge of the bed and let out a long, contented sigh. Days turned into weeks, and the wedding became a sweet memory. Darius continued to thrive in his career, but he felt a growing desire for deeper connections. He began volunteering at local community centers, realizing that sometimes a single genuine act can really uplift someone. He kept this to himself, wanting it to be personal, but he held on to the knowledge that he had once made a difference in a family's life, and that impact could spread in many ways. He still heard from Grace now and then, getting updates on her child's milestones and how they were becoming more confident, no longer haunted by the past. Tom would occasionally send him a funny text or meme, a little reminder of their ongoing friendship. He never forgot that first awkward moment they met in the airport coffee line, how random it felt, but looking back, it was all meant to be. Life can be a cosmic puzzle that fits together in unexpected ways. Whenever Darius found himself on a plane, he couldn't help but think of Grace. He would look around, noticing if anyone seemed to be struggling. He didn't always give up his seat. Sometimes it just wasn't necessary. But being aware of others made him more empathetic. One day, he spotted a young mom with 2 toddlers, her eyes tired as she juggled her bags. He offered to help her with her luggage, and the relief on her face was clear. That familiar feeling of fulfillment washed over him. It wasn't about getting recognition. It was just about being a good person. Looking ahead, Darius couldn't foresee the challenges life would throw his way, but he felt a renewed confidence in his ability to tackle them. He had tapped into a deep well of strength and compassion within himself, especially after dealing with Grace's issues. No matter how unpredictable life got, the impact of a single act of kindness remained steady. In the grand scheme of his life, that one small choice to give up his first-class seat became a thread weaving together trust, friendship, and justice. He didn't think of it as anything special, but for the woman who needed it, it made a world of difference. Through all the ups and downs, they emerged stronger and more connected. Their story serves as a quiet reminder that once kindness is set in motion, it can ripple out, touching lives and altering destinies in ways we can't even imagine. Did you enjoy this tale of ambition, bravery, and the power of one voice to inspire change? Share your thoughts in the comments about what resonated with you or which character's journey surprised you the most. We love hearing from you. And if you want more stories filled with twists, heart, and inspiration, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. There's plenty more to come, and we'd love for you to join us on this journey. Thank you for subscribing.